Today we are going to get to talk about strength and TTRPGs. I have been wanting to do this video and talk about this for so long, just kind of physical things in general in tabletop role-playing games, and today we're finally getting to. But we're in the wrong place. This will not at all serve. No, to talk about strength, we must travel across the misty mountains, beyond the desert of confusion. Yes, we must finally arrive at the Temple of Iron, long held sacred by the dwarves. So how do we get there? Well, we're in luck because I happen to be, I don't like to brag about this, but I'm actually a very high-level spellcaster. So with a simple snap of my fingers, I should be able to get us there. Welcome to the Temple of Iron, or as my wife likes to call it, the garage. Okay, now for this analysis, I'm going to be comparing two systems. One is going to be GURPS, which is one that I'm very familiar with, and I think also has a very simulationist feel to it. A lot of the stuff is true to real world. And the other one we're going to use is Dungeons and Dragons, because everybody knows that. It's the game I first started playing a long time ago, and I just think it's a good base point. Now, what we're going to learn along the way is that they're all wildly inaccurate, and there's plenty more things like this with physical exercises in TTRPGs, or just physical activities in general that are just wildly inaccurate. Sometimes way too easy, sometimes way too hard. It's all over the place, but that's what we're going to talk about today. Now in Dungeons and Dragons, the maximum amount you can lift, push, or drag is going to be 30 times your strength. Now, for anybody who lifts weights, when you hear the maximum you could lift, you immediately think deadlift. So that's what we have here. That's what this bar is for. We're going to be doing some deadlifts today. And then in GURPS, your basic lift. So for a normal human commoner, it's going to be this little weight right here. And then I think this is going to be about my max. Now, if you're thinking, man, that looks like a lot of weight for that deadlift, is that the max that you can do? No, this is actually what Dungeons and Dragons consider. This is 305 pounds, and 300 pounds is what is considered to be reasonable and normal, the maximum lift of an average strength 10 commoner. It's insane. So a quick note here, in doing research for this video, I didn't think anybody had covered this before, and I realized that Bob Worldbuilder actually had, and he mentioned, hey, don't go try to lift a whole bunch of weight to test this out if you're not used to lifting. And I just want to echo that. So keep that in mind. Please don't hurt yourself. More about exercise at the end of the video. So let's just go ahead and, let's do some reps, right? This is the average weight that a normal human commoner can lift. Let's see if we can do it. You know, we're going to go like this. Now while I'm doing this, you might be saying, hey, Nightharo, why don't you do more? And the reason that I'm not doing more is because this is literally all the weights that I own. And so even if I wanted to do more, I couldn't. So here we are. And speaking of lifting more weights, if you would like to see me lift more weights, consider becoming a channel member. It's the best way to support this channel and helps me make more high quality videos like this. Although, again, to be honest, this is probably the first and last video I will do where I'll be lifting weights on camera, but you know, you never know. So pretty hard, pretty heavy. And that's what the average person is supposed to be able to do. Now, I can't do this for reps. I can do 8 or 10. If I were to guess my absolute max right now, I would say someplace, around 400 pounds. A little bit south of that is probably where I'm at. I'm a little under 6 foot, or about 182 centimeters for those not using freedom units. Oh, and I'm sorry, this weight is about 138 kilograms. Is about where we're at. Now, as a reminder, your carrying capacity in Tales of the Valiant and D&D 5e is your strength score multiplied by 15. This is the weight in pounds you can carry around, which is high enough that most characters don't usually have to worry about it. Now, I was in the military, so I have significant amount of real-world experience with carrying a much heavier weight around, and I can tell you that this is absolutely insane. 150 pounds is what a fully equipped US soldier carries while in the field, right? Traveling from point A to point B, everything you would need to live outside, okay? Typically you have about 60 pounds worth of battle rattle, as I would call it. So that means your weapon, your ammunition, your webbing, everything else you might have, your Kevlar, all that good stuff, about 60 pounds. Funny story, I asked one of my friends in the Navy about it, what our rucksacks used to weigh, and he just like laughed at me and was like, dude, a rucksack is going to be about 80 pounds. It could be down to 60, but it's going to be somewhere in that range. The point is, you're looking at about 150 pounds or a little bit less. You can do a full day's march in that. You can do over 10 miles. If you need to, you can do 15 or 20. But even if you're just doing 10, you are absolutely going to be encumbered while doing so, and you're going to be feeling it at the end of the day and for the next several days. I can promise you that. A much more reasonable amount of gear to be wearing and operating in is something close to that 60 pounds that I mentioned at first, which is about the typical amount that a US, military person, their loadout is, plus or minus, of course. So we are looking at about twice what is reasonable here when we're talking about strength in Tales of the Valiant and Dungeons and Dragons, at least on the low end. But what about the high end? And I hear some of you saying, how does this relate to those deadlifts you were doing earlier? Well, I'll start by saying that deadlifts are an excellent idea when you are considering strength or really any physical activity in TTRPGs. It's almost always a good idea to just look at what is already out there. We have decades of data on running, jumping, swimming, lifting, etc. So why not use all that data? And from a game design perspective, this also makes sense. We really are aiming for what that fantasy fulfillment in TTRPGs, and using something that people know and that is familiar to them is a great idea, and it gives them a basis from which to judge things on, because you know what a really strong person in real life can do, or maybe you don't, but at least a game designer should, and it's a basis for you to start. Even superheroes, right? We typically relate them to ourselves. Wow, Spider-Man can jump so high. Wow, this person is so strong, and what have you, because we're relating it to ourselves and what we know in the real world. So it's a great place to start if you're looking for a bit of realism in your TTRPGs. The deadlifts come in because they are, generally speaking, the best lift to judge what is the maximum amount that someone can lift. However, the other issue here, at least with TOV and D&D, is that pushing and dragging are vastly different than lifting. And so including all of those things in the same category, well, honestly, it's just a bit insane. And one of these is just not like the others. The amount you can push or drag is much higher than the amount you can physically pick up off the ground. Another thing with this is that a strength score of 18, or even if you want to call it 20, would mean that your max deadlift would be around 600 pounds. I can tell you that record was broken all the way back in 1964 with deadlifts of over 700 pounds. The current amount is over 1,000, and I don't mean with like the bodysuits and everything. I just mean purely with a weight belt at that point. So again, we see that even at the high end, we are incredibly far off. We're going from 600 pounds to 1,000, okay? And even if you want to drop it down 100 and say, okay, you could walk around with this or something, we're still hundreds of pounds off. We're still 50% off. It's pretty egregious. But wait, there's more. One rule I almost missed is that for each size category higher or lower that you either double or half the amount that the person can lift. And in fact, this actually gets us pretty close to the real world numbers of what you could see a normal person. It just also happens to be a little bit insane that the size modifier here effectively doubles or halves your strength. Many of the TTRPG systems rely on similar rules, and it's just kind of wild. So don't think that I'm just picking on D&D here. Also, I have plenty more to say about my current favorite system, GURPS, and so we'll get there. I'm not just picking on Tales of the Valiant or Dungeons and Dragons. But before we move on to GURPS, what about gear, i.e. steroids and other performance-enhancing drugs? Well, interesting fact, unlike bodybuilding, where the goal is to achieve a certain look and quote-unquote gear, which is again code for all those performance-enhancing drugs, is considered to be mandatory if you want to go pro. In powerlifting, this is not the case. Powerlifting being the sport where your goal is to lift the heaviest weight possible. Note that doesn't mean that there aren't plenty of people that are using performance-enhancing drugs in strength sports. I'm sure there are, but it is not nearly as ubiquitous as it is in bodybuilding. And just because someone looks really huge, many of the powerlifters, I'll pop up some here, don't look like, Greek gods, okay? They look like average people, and most of the time they're actually fairly overweight. So just kind of an interesting fact here and something to keep in mind. Someone who was like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was a bodybuilder, would not be the strongest person in the world by any means. I know we kind of combine those two in our fantasy TTRPGs, where being the best looking also means being the strongest. Now let's just go ahead and move on to these dumbbells here. So in GURPS, your strength is derived for how much you can pick up from the ground and lift over the head with one arm in 1 second. So as we can see, pretty easy to do. And then for our dumbbells, our small one here is about 9 kilograms or 20 pounds. And the other one's about 85 pounds, or is 85 pounds, or about, I think, 38 kilograms, almost 39, close to it. So now that seems reasonable to me. I'm not actually sure what the average person could do here, but I do know at the maximum on GURPS, it's still wildly inaccurate. Let me just demonstrate. Now, obviously that's pretty difficult for me, but if you can imagine, I took 20 pounds off this, 10 pounds, it's gonna be a lot easier, and I'm not gonna have a problem. I decided after filming this video that a bunch of GURPS nerds were not gonna take my word that I could lift 65 pounds over my head in 1 second, nor probably should they. So I went back and re-recorded after a couple of days of rest, just to show you that this is something that I could indeed do. Okay, now some of you are saying, no freaking way, that I am strength 18, and I completely agree, but you're getting ahead of me here. So let's back up for everybody else who isn't like looking at the basic set. If you're enjoying this video, do me a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. Consider sharing this video with a friend, and if you really like what I'm doing, consider becoming a channel member. YouTube's search and recommendation system is far from perfect, and it's metrics like those that really show it that, hey, this is a good video, and hey, this is a good channel, and we should recommend it to other people. So for starters here, looking at this, basic lift as defined by GURPS is not a standard lift. It's not even well defined. In the basic set, it says a basic lift is the maximum weight you can lift over your head with one hand in 1 second. Is it from the ground? Is it from the waist to the shoulder? Is it just from the shoulder? Who knows? And when you add the time variable in there, things get even more confusing. I will say that I think this is in there to give you a good idea about the amount of weight you can move in one round, but honestly, it just complicates things more to my way of thinking. And when you consider that if you double the amount of time in GURPS, it says that it doubles the amount you can lift. I think that's, again, we've jumped the shark, okay? We're in La La Land. I don't know of any weight or exercise where I can lift twice what I could in 1 second in 2 seconds. And so again, it just doesn't make sense. We're in a weird world where like this seems to have no basis in reality. Now, I happen to know that the line editor at GURPS at the time of this writing was Sean Punch. I think he actually might still be, aka Crom, who has a doctorate degree in physics. So I can only assume here that he has a very good reason for doing what he did. However, neither I nor I think the SJ Games forums seem to have any real idea of what that is. And again, I've read plenty of things on the Steve Jackson Games forums, and there are a lot of great ideas, people trying to make things that sound really good. There are holes in all of them, at least all the ones that I have found. If there's one that hasn't, drop it in the comments below. And in general, if you just disagree with me and you think I'm wrong, you know what to do. Get in the comments. But I just don't honestly think that this is a reasonable thing, and there's any way to kind of infer. Again, people are doing all kinds of crazy things, jumping over themselves to make this make sense, and I just honestly don't think it does. Now, okay, all that aside, what does my basic lift say about my strength? Well, at 65 pounds in 1 second, and again, this was 1 second, that's why I went back. So I did it with 65 pounds. It is in 1 second, and it does equal a strength of 18. And if you know nothing about GURPS, this might sound reasonable to you, but in fact, 18 strength in GURPS is absolutely crazy. To further make the point, GURPS gives us a really nice table explaining what the differences in strength are. And while I don't have time to go through every single one of these, let's look at the highest two. So I think that I am currently a solid 13 in strength. And you know what? When doing GURPS stuff and trying to figure out how this basic lift should work, I have thought I was anywhere from strength 8, strength 10, strength 16 or whatever, currently now 18, but I think that by just the description, 13 or 14, I think I'm solidly a 13. And it says that this is exceptional. Such an attribute is immediately apparent as bulging muscles, feline grace, witty dialogue, glowing health to those who meet you. Now, strength is kind of an exception because as we kind of went over before, what you look like doesn't actually tell you how strong someone is, at least to a large extent. So I think that does kind of fit. I think I'm probably solidly a 13. And if you said, oh, you add on all this other stuff, again, there's a weight weightlifting skill in GURPS. If you're actually a skilled weightlifter, you can lift a lot more than that, but I think that's about right. Now, a 15 is the highest number that it gives us a description for, and it says, 15 or more is amazing. An attribute this high draws constant comment and attention and probably guides your career choices. Now, I could be wrong, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that strength has not guided my career choices, and at an 18, I think it would make sense if it would. So I think we can say, it's fair to say that my strength is not actually an 18 in GURPS. So, this is kind of incongruous. But what the real question is like, why do we care? What is the purpose of all this? Well, the reason all of this is so important is because in most TTRPGs, your base attributes factor into so many things that you can or can't do in the game and how well you do them in relation particularly to other players. And that ultimately affects the core desire of any TTRPG, which is fantasy fulfillment, right? If I make a big, strong character, I want them to feel big and strong. And if I'm an average player, I shouldn't, and somebody else spent a whole bunch of time and effort and allocated their points to strength, I shouldn't be able to do the same things they can. And if I can, it cheapens the play experience for them. And if they can't do what they want, well, they're not getting that fantasy fulfillment. So I actually think this in realistic TTRPGs, I think that are somewhat based in reality, I think this is a huge deal. And I think it's a big problem for a lot of game systems and for a lot of players. Now, having said that, that's all a bit abstract. Let me give you a couple of concrete examples of the kind of things that I'm talking about. Just in the past week while playing GURPS, although this could have been any TTRPG, one of the other PCs playing a small character asked a giant Minotaur character to throw him at a mob, okay? Now, many gaming groups, you would simply roll a strength check or, the GM hand waves it and says, okay, yeah, do whatever. But for our group, we really like it's a capital G in our TTRPG. We really like the game part of it. And so for us, we want to know, can the Minotaur do that? This was a small character, didn't weigh very much. Turns out it was totally fine. But there's a lot of edge cases where like, oh, can I do that? And for myself personally and many people in our group, we want to know like, hey, is this possible? Are these edge cases possible? And we want we want to play by the rules. We want the rules to guide us and show us. Now, if you're not of that mind, for many of those groups, trying to figure out if it's even possible just sounds like work and it's not fun for them. And again, if you're someone like Bob World Builder, you would 100% be on this page, right? He's very much into rules light. I don't think he wants to do any calculations. I think to a lot of people, maybe you out there, this might sound like work. But for those of us who are more into the game design portion of it and really like the numbers and everything else, we have designed a character that we will fulfill some fantasy, and we spend a great deal of time on it, and that's part of the fun. That's part of how we play the game, is taking a long time to design characters, and I want them to do the thing that I have set them out to do. Now, again, for all of those who might be thinking this altogether sweaty, let me point out something more on the lightweight side that has a similar effect. In Dungeons & Dragons, right, a more lightweight system, not incredibly lightweight, but much more lightweight than GURPS, swimming is based on your strength. So in theory, a very high strength person would have a very high proficiency in swimming. Well, how does that feel when the strength 18 character, who's supposed to be a circus strongman character, can outswim the slim elf? The elf ranger or something? Does that really make sense? And does it feel like it's fulfilling your fantasy? Now, a lot of people will say, oh, the GM just makes a ruling then. The thing is, you're putting a lot of extra work on the GM to make a whole bunch of rulings. And the other thing is, a lot of people want to play by the rules. That's why you pay, you buy these TTRPGs so you can have a system, a framework of play. And so for a lot of us, that's not a very satisfactory answer. Yeah, it can be okay, but in general, we would prefer something better. So these and many more issues like these are innumerable and are reasons why things like this are important in more complex TTRPGs. And for those of us who do happen to care about it. Now, for everyone else, I just want to say, I just hope you find this entertaining. I get that this doesn't apply to you. I'm not trying to push my worldview or my thoughts on TTRPGs on you. I just hope this is entertaining. But, to get back to the whole point of this exercise, right? Besides just being entertaining, is that, with most physical activities in modern TTRPGs, they do a pretty good job, but there's still a ton of things in most of them that don't make sense. And this really affects that whole fantasy fulfillment that I and a lot of other people are really looking for. And I think that the real answer to all this, despite all my criticisms, is like, yeah, these systems are doing a decent job, but at the same time, they could be doing a much better job. And that's really the whole point of this video. Not to hate on any one system or to say, hey, all of this stuff is bad. You know, I could go through many things just off the top of my head of my favorite system that I don't think makes sense. And a lot of people have pointed out, hey, you know, some of this stuff was made a long time ago, and so we didn't have the internet and what have you. Sure, I'm fine with going with that. I still think there's some criticism there, but I'm fine with going with that. My point though is that, you know, hey, we do have all those things now. So if you're making a TTRPG or you're one of these creators and this is the level of realism you want in your TTRPG, that I think you should take a look at this stuff. And I hope that someone out there will look at this and go, hey, you know what? We could probably think a little bit deeper than that. And you know what? We do have a lot more data than we did 20 or 30 years ago. And there's probably something better that we can do. And if you're aiming for realism and if you're aiming for that, you know, capital G in that RPG, I think that this is a good way to go with using real life as a basis for this stuff. Anyways, I hope this video, if nothing else, was entertaining for you. That's really the main reason. But you know, I can't help myself with saying, hey, I want to improve the things that I love so much, which is tabletop role-playing games and honestly board games more generally. Anyways, that's it for today. I appreciate you guys watching and we'll catch you in the next one.